You're listening to Open for Discussion, where, man, y'all probably shouldn't have said that. It tends to happen. Let's start the show.
715 East Music Group.
Hey, what's good, fam? Just coming to you right quick to give my thoughts on the Amber Guyger, Botham Jean conviction and sentencing. I was asked, actually, the day of the conviction, just to give some thoughts on it, but I purposefully did not want to speak at that time. I wanted to wait until the sentencing was handed down, because I believe giving any type of analysis or even really giving my thoughts at that point, I felt like it wouldn't encompass the entirety of the entire ordeal, so to speak. But today, the sentencing came down. She was given 10 years. She was convicted of murder, of course, and was sentenced to 10 years. I know that, some people were elated after the verdict was levied that she was guilty, which I definitely do believe that that guilty verdict was appropriate. She took another man's life who was literally just sitting inside his own dwelling, inside his own residence, eating some ice cream. She opens the door and shoots the man. So, there is no way to justify that. Regardless of how you feel, regardless of what led up to it, it's hard to conceive of not finding a person guilty of taking another person's life when they just sitting in their own house eating a bowl of ice cream. Now, whether or not the sentence was sufficient, of course, that's definitely cause for some strong emotions. Personally, I wasn't surprised that she was only given 10 years. Again, if we look at the course of history, there has never been a strong pattern or a strong history of sentencing when it comes to the law enforcement or police officers shooting unarmed black males here in America. Unfortunately, it's the norm. And again, my emotions, my feelings are very fluid. They're dynamic. They're constantly changing. So I'm just giving it to you raw, just kind of straight off my heart, just what I'm feeling. And, to me, what my take is on it. I thought, again, I was happy that she got convicted. I was like, terrific. Again, it was asinine to believe that she wouldn't or shouldn't be convicted. But and again, history just was really prevalent to me in this one, and I couldn't help but think of Laquan McDonald, who was killed by Jason Van Dyke. That one was up in Chicago. That's the one where they had, where Jason Van Dyke stated that he was running towards them, away from them with the knife after they had given him all these commands. They end up shooting the brother 16 times, 14 times in the back while he was laying on the ground. Fortunately, Van Dyke was convicted, second-degree murder. I think he was only given 7 years. So it just went to show that the value of black life was, to them, only worth 7 years. Also, Jordan Edwards, that was the brother who was killed by Roy Oliver out in Texas. This is the incident to where, again, I'll be as accurate as I can. Like I said, this is really raw. I didn't do a whole lot of research. These are just ones that I can really remember. To where the officers responded to a party and they were told that there were gunshots or people were brandishing firearms. And they arrive on scene and Roy Oliver shoots into a vehicle with his rifle and shoots Jordan Edwards in the head with an assault rifle. He stated that the vehicle was coming toward his partner, and he felt the need to use deadly force at that moment to stop the threat. The catch in that was his own partner, who the vehicle was allegedly going towards, didn't even feel the need to use deadly force. Fortunately, Roy Oliver was convicted, and they gave him 15 years. Again, he won't do all 15. But again, 15 years for murder, it's kind of light. Stephon Clark, even more recently, officers in his case, there were no charges. Now, I'm sure this one should be fresh in everybody's head because that just came down a couple weeks ago. But Stephon Clark out in Sacramento was allegedly, or police were allegedly called to the scene because his brother was breaking windows in cars. So you got a police helicopter, which actually, caught a lot of the actual shooting live. Officers responded. He fled. They tell him to stop. He stops, throws his hands up, and walks towards the officers, and they shoot him. I think certain autopsies say they shot him 8 times. Another one says 6. But regardless, he was shot with his hands in the air, only holding a cell phone. Initially, they said the brother had a gun, or they believed he had a gun. So, of course, he was a threat. Or they believed he might have had a crowbar in his hands. But again, he had his hands up, doing as they commanded, and they shot the brother. No charges were filed against the 2 officers, Terrence Mercardile and Jared Robinette. No charges. But then you look at the case up in Minnesota. This one really caught my attention. Muhammad Noor, who ended up shooting and killing Justine Diamond. This was a case that a black officer, or he was Somali officer, killed a white lady. Similar, she calls 911. He goes to the scene. He responds to the scene. They were believing they were going to a scene to address a potential sexual assault that was occurring in an alley. That's what she reported once she calls 911. The officers show up to the scene. Officer Noor is sitting in a patrol car in the alley. She walks up and spooks him. He immediately fires his weapon out the window and kills her. All she had in her hand was a cell phone. He was convicted. Convicted and given 12 and a half years. Yet Stephon Clark, very similar situation, only had a cell phone. No charges brought against them. And I read some of the verbiage in the case of Officer Muhammad Noor. And one thing that really stood out to me was they said, how could a white woman in pajamas be a threat? And I asked, how could a brother sitting in his own house eating ice cream be a threat? There's a common theme in both of these cases. In all of these cases where the black guy is perceived as threatening. And, again, I'm thinking of some other cases that really stand out with me. Philando Castile, that was a big one. That was one that really shook me for a minute. Because the brother was sitting in the passenger seat, told the officer that he had a weapon on him. Officer was asking for ID. He's reaching for his ID. The officer gets spooked and shoots the man 6 times, I believe it was, in front of his girlfriend. And in the back passenger seat was his daughter. You had a little kid. This officer shot the man after you giving him the instruction, and he's doing everything by the book. And this officer still shoots this brother. That was Officer Geronimo Yanez. No charges. No charge. Oh, I'm sorry. No, he was not guilty. He was found not guilty of second-degree murder. How that happens, I don't know. But again, as you can probably assume, Philando Castile, he was a brother. And 12-year-old Tamir Rice, officers pull up. This is in Ohio. 12 years old, they pull up. He has I believe it was a BB gun. No questions asked. Officers shoot him. Again, they responded to a scene that there was some youth playing with some firearms. And some people say, well, they shouldn't have removed the orange cap off and the officers wouldn't have shot him. Or the officers could have just engaged him and said, hey, drop your weapon. That didn't happen. 12 years old, lost his life because he appeared to be a threat. Tamir Rice was the brother. John Crawford, this was also another one, also in Ohio. John Crawford in Walmart got a BB gun, shopping, talking on his cell phone. Someone called 911 stating the brother was waving a gun at people. Officers respond, no questions asked, they shoot him. Shoot him and kill him. John Crawford, a brother, seen as a threat. So because he was a threat, that gave officers a right to shoot him and take his life. To me, these are the common themes that really infuriate me. But these are the common themes that we have to address as a nation so that these things can stop happening. Again, I'm glad that she was found guilty. It doesn't take a high level of intellect to see why she was found guilty. Again, now we can say that, I think some of the excuses that they had tried to present in her defense was she had worked overtime, she was tired, she was upset, she was having a lover's quarrel. Again, her lover was a married guy. She had worked overtime, but she's a trained professional. She's trained for these type situations, but she failed to respond or react accordingly. She didn't administer adequate CPR because she was distraught. But you're trained for these situations. So I'm not one to bash law enforcement, have the utmost respect for law enforcement, because when something happens and I'm in need, the first people I'm calling is 911. Come from a long lineage and a family of law enforcement officers. But I do understand that there's a broken system. I do understand that the socialized narrative of America puts the black man as a threat, and therefore the threat can be taken down by cops without repercussion. So there is very little value for black life. And that's, to me, what makes the Black Lives Matter movement so important. They're stating something that societally we don't believe. They'll say all lives matter, but they don't mean all lives matter. So that's why it's important that we say Black Lives Matter. Again, going back to this case, I have no idea how this brother could be seen as a threat in his own house. Do I believe that it was premeditated? I don't know. To me, I think there are a lot of questions that I have that, maybe I can, once more details about the case come out, they may shed more light. But the jury was able to convict her of murder, which I thought was advantageous of the prosecution to pursue. I was thinking, hey, manslaughter, possibly second degree, but they were able to get her on a murder charge, which to me I thought that was very advantageous. And there was clearly enough evidence for the jury to convict her of murder. And a common law definition of murder is killing another human being with malice aforethought. So they were able to prove that to the jury, and the jury was able to levy a verdict based on the evidence that was presented. I thought it was absolute mockery for the judge to allow the castle doctrine. She's not even in her own house. How does that apply? How does the castle doctrine apply? But again, even through that veiled attempt to provide some adjudication to the actions, I believe that justice in the conviction was served. Again, sentencing, she got 10 years. She won't serve 10 in their totality. Of course, she's going to appeal. She'll serve 50% in time served, and she may do 3 years. But again, goes back to the value of a black life. So, my thoughts on sentencing, again, it's very fluid. I believe that, let me start by giving this disclaimer. I was talking with some colleagues, and I actually said that they give her 10 years. So, again, I'm not trying to boast, but I think historically, if you just look at the pattern, you see, she's probably going to get 10 years, and she's not going to do a full 10. So, hit the nail on the head on that. I believe that it should be more. Every gun owner, to me, has an increased responsibility. If you possess a gun, I believe that if you use that gun because you made the decision to purchase that firearm or that gun, I believe that you should be held to a higher standard and a higher accountability. I believe if she didn't have that gun she wouldn't have engaged in that particular situation. If she thought she heard somebody in that apartment, if she did not have that gun, she would not have engaged. Similarly to the whole Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman incident, if that coward didn't have that gun, he never would have pursued Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin wouldn't have in turn had to defend himself and beat that coward up. And that coward in turn have to shoot Trayvon Martin because he engaged him because he had this false confidence of that firearm that he had in his hand. So, I believe there are some factors. It's very dynamic. There are the factor of gun control that goes into it, the narrative of the black male equaling a threat to white America. That's a dynamic of it. Of course, a flawed criminal justice system. Again, we're often told to have faith in the criminal justice system, but they've too often proven themselves unfaithful. So again, the conviction was great, but again, the sentencing, I believe, missed the mark. I was actually asked, what would I like to have seen? I would have liked to have seen a sentence that was equitable for the crime. And me personally, I'm not a believer in the criminal justice system in the U.S. I'm not a believer in mass incarceration, nor the current way that our prison system is structured. I don't believe that it's rehabilitative, and I don't believe that it produces citizens who can be released and be productive citizens in society. So I believe that we need a reformation. So would I have liked to seen her get life? No, I honestly don't believe that it was premeditated. Again, I don't believe from the knowledge that I have that actually it was murder. I believe that there were some errors that were made in sequence and led to this horrific tragedy. This brother's life is lost. But again, whatever the evidence was, the jury was able to convict her of murder. So that lets me know that they know some things that we all don't know. So it fit the definition. But again, so based on the information I knew that I've ascertained so far, I was thinking, hey, give her 20 to 25. She'd serve 15 to 17, and that would be adequate. Again, that goes back to my ownership of firearms. You should be held to a higher standard. Because when you fire that gun, there was no taking that bullet back. You took a person's life. And again, I'll say this to the top of every mountain. If she didn't have that gun, she wouldn't have engaged. She probably would not have even gone into that dwelling. So there's this false confidence, this false bravado that people have carrying these firearms. I believe that consequences should be maximized if you use a firearm in any capacity. So if you're wrong, you're going to pay for it. You should think before you engage in using that firearm. Just my thoughts. Again, I went much longer than I wanted to. And again, it's very raw. So, hey, forgive me for any mistakes and feel free to disagree with me. Enlighten me if I'm wrong. But I believe in, in some good dialogue and we'll see where it goes from here. I'm out.